They took his wife as a war prize. He hunted every man who touched her. In the mountains, they say a man's soul is tied to his land, his love, and his honor. For the men of the Durlwanger Brigade, these were things to be burned, broken, and forgotten. They didn't know they had just unleashed a beast far more savage than themselves. The Tatra Mountains had carved Tomasz into their own image, hard, silent, and unforgiving. At 35, his body bore the weathered map of a life lived on stone and snow, each scar a testament to survival in a place that killed the weak without ceremony. His hands, broad and calloused from axe and knife, could track a wolf through fresh powder or gentle a frightened lamb with equal skill. But it was his eyes that marked him as truly dangerous. Pale blue like winter ice, they held the patient intensity of a predator who had learned that the mountains rewarded those who waited. Their cabin sat in a clearing so remote that the war, raging across Europe like a disease, seemed little more than a distant rumor. Here among the ancient pines and granite peaks, Tomasz and his wife Zofia had built something that felt eternal. A life measured not in the chaos of empires, but in the steady rhythm of seasons. The cycle of lambs born and wolves killed. The quiet communion of two souls who had found perfect understanding in each other. Zofia moved through their simple home like music made visible, her dark hair catching the morning light as she tended the fire that would warm their breakfast. She was 32, her beauty refined by mountain life into something both fierce and gentle, the kind of woman who could birth a calf in a blizzard and sing lullabies that made hardened men weep. When she smiled at Tomasz over their wooden table, the gesture contained everything he had ever believed worth protecting. The snares were empty again, he said, accepting the bowl of hot porridge she offered. The deer are moving higher. Winter will come early this year. She settled beside him, her hand finding his with the unconscious ease of long intimacy. Then we'll prepare for winter early. We always have. It was true. They had survived 7 years in these mountains, weathering storms that would have killed city dwellers, finding abundance where others saw only desolation. Their love had been forged in shared hardship and tempered by the knowledge that they were all each other, had in a world that seemed determined to devour everything beautiful. But even in paradise, wolves prowled the edges. Tomasz felt it first as a change in the birds, the subtle shift in their songs that spoke of strangers in the forest. His hand moved instinctively to the bone handle of his knife, a gesture so automatic that Zofia barely noticed. She had learned to read these signs too, to trust the ancient instincts that kept them alive in a place where winter could kill you and men could be worse than any wild beast. Someone's coming, he said quietly. They listened together in the mountain silence. No engines, no voices, just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a hawk. But Tomasz knew. Something had changed in their sanctuary, something that made his blood run cold with possibilities he refused to contemplate. The old shelter, he said, rising from the table with fluid grace. Take what you need, go now. Zofia didn't argue. 7 years in the mountains had taught her to trust her husband's instincts absolutely. She gathered their emergency supplies with practiced efficiency. Food, warm clothes, the small leather pouch that contained their most precious possessions. Within minutes, she had vanished into the forest toward a hidden cave they had prepared for exactly this moment. Tomasz watched her go, his heart clenching with the terrible knowledge that he might be seeing her for the last time. Then he turned back to the cabin and began his own preparations. If strangers were coming to his mountain, they would find a shepherd ready to defend his flock. But the forest remained empty as the hours passed. No soldiers appeared. No sounds of pursuit echoed through the trees. By evening, Tomasz began to wonder if his instincts had betrayed him. He retrieved Zofia from her hiding place, and they spent the night in watchful peace, every shadow suspect, every sound analyzed. 3 days later, a boy from the village below arrived at their door, his face pale with the kind of terror that marked children who had seen too much too young. "Mr. Tomasz," the boy gasped, fighting for breath after his desperate climb. "Father Jakob sent me, says to tell you the wolves have come to the valley. The bad wolves, the ones that walk on 2 legs. Tomasz knelt to the boy's level, his voice gentle despite the ice forming in his chest. "What wolves, son?" "Germans, SS. Not like the others. These ones are different. Father Jakob says they're the kind that burn churches and laugh about it. They came yesterday, set up in the old inn. Their leader, he's asking questions about the mountains, about who lives up high. The boy's words hit Tomasz like physical blows. The Durlwanger Brigade, he had heard whispers of their reputation, stories that decent men refused to repeat in full. They were not soldiers but licensed savages, criminals and madmen given uniforms and weapons to do the Reich's dirtiest work. How many? He asked. 6 men, maybe 7. The leader has scars on his face like someone tried to carve him up and gave up halfway through. Tomasz felt Zofia's hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him to humanity even as his mind began to calculate distances, escape routes, the 100 deadly variables that might determine whether they lived or died in the next few days. "Tell Father Jakob we received his message," Tomasz said, pressing a silver coin into the boy's palm. "Tell him we'll be careful." After the boy left, Tomasz and Zofia sat in their kitchen as the sun set behind the peaks, painting the snow red as blood. Neither spoke, but both understood that their sanctuary had been breached. Their isolation turned from protection into vulnerability. "We could leave," Zofia said finally. "Cross into Slovakia, start over." Tomasz studied her face in the firelight, memorizing every beloved detail. "Is that what you want?" She was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "This is our home. These are our mountains. I won't be driven from them by monsters." He reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the calluses she had earned through years of shared labor. "Then we stay. But if they come here, if they threaten what's ours—" "I know," she whispered. "I know what you were before you became my husband. I know what you're capable of becoming again." That night, Tomasz lay awake listening to Zofia's breathing, committing the sound to memory as if it were the most precious music ever composed. Outside, the wind howled through the peaks with a voice like hunting wolves, and in that sound he heard the echo of his own dark nature, the predator he had buried beneath 7 years of peace and love. By morning, fresh snow had erased the boy's tracks and covered the world in deceptive purity. Tomasz rose before dawn and checked his snares, finding them empty but for the subtle signs that told him everything he needed to know. Someone had been watching their cabin from the tree line. Someone had studied their routines, counted their resources, planned their approach. The hunt had already begun. But for now, Zofia still slept peacefully in their bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow like ink on snow. For now, she was safe, warm, protected by the illusion that love could build walls strong enough to keep out the world's darkness. For now, Tomasz was still a shepherd. The transformation would come soon enough. The attack came on the 4th day, when Tomasz had allowed himself to hope that the danger might pass them by. He had risen before dawn to check the snares on the mountain's eastern face, a route that would take him away from the cabin for most of the morning. It was a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Zofia had kissed him goodbye at the door, her lips warm against his in the pre-dawn cold. "Bring back something good for dinner," she had said, her smile carrying all the ordinary magic of a marriage measured in small, perfect moments. "I'll bring back the world," he had replied, a foolish promise made by a man who still believed love could shield them from anything. The eastern slopes were treacherous in fresh snow, requiring all of Tomasz's concentration to navigate safely. His snares yielded 2 rabbits and a ptarmigan, enough meat to last them several days. He cleaned them expertly with his hunting knife, the blade moving with the precision of long practice. Blood steamed on the snow, red against white, a pattern that would soon take on terrible significance. It was the silence that warned him first. The forest had gone too quiet, the natural sounds of bird and beast replaced by an emptiness that spoke of predators nearby. Tomasz froze, his every sense extended, reading the mountain's mood with the fluency of a man born to this harsh country. Smoke, not the clean scent of his own fire, but something darker, more acrid, something that carried the stench of violation. He ran then, abandoning stealth for speed, his boots finding purchase on treacherous slopes through instinct and desperation. The smoke grew thicker as he approached the clearing, and with it came sounds that turned his blood to ice. Male laughter, coarse and cruel, drifting through the trees like the howling of rabid wolves. From the forest edge he saw them. 6 men in SS uniforms clustered around his cabin like carrion birds at a feast. Their leader was immediately recognizable from the boy's description, a scarred face that looked like it had been carved by an angry god, pale eyes that held the empty shine of madness given license. SS Hauptscharführer Erich Metzger of the Durlwanger Brigade, a man whose name was whispered in the same breath as devils and demons. The cabin door hung open, torn from its hinges. Furniture lay scattered in the yard, chairs broken for kindling, their table overturned and splintered. Everything Tomasz and Zofia had built together was being systematically destroyed by men who found pleasure in the desecration of love. But it was the sound from inside the cabin that stopped his heart. Zofia's voice, raised not in screams, but in fierce, defiant curses hurled at her attackers in the mountain dialect of her people. She was alive, she was fighting, and that knowledge filled Tomasz with a rage so pure it threatened to consume his reason entirely. "Bring her out," Metzger called in German, his accent rough with the particular brutality of men who had learned to speak through violence. "Let's see what mountain beauty looks like in proper light." They dragged Zofia into the yard like a prize of war. Her dress was torn, her dark hair disheveled, but her eyes still blazed with the fire that had first captured Tomasz's heart. Even in the grip of monsters, she carried herself with the dignity of mountain royalty, her chin raised in defiance that made her captors laugh with delight. "Such spirit," Metzger observed, circling her like a wolf studying wounded prey. "It will be interesting to see how long it lasts." From his concealment, Tomasz counted weapons, assessed positions, calculated the mathematics of violence with the cold precision his father had taught him. 6 men, all armed, spread across the clearing in positions that would make a frontal assault suicidal. Between him and Zofia lay 50 meters of open ground that might as well have been 1,000. He could take one, perhaps two, before the others cut him down. Zofia would still be lost, and his death would accomplish nothing but the satisfaction of dying with a weapon in his hand. The predator in him counseled patience. Watch, learn, wait for the moment when emotion could be transformed into effective action. But as he watched them load Zofia into the back of their military truck like cargo, every instinct screamed at him to attack, to die fighting rather than live with the knowledge that he had hidden in the trees while devils stole his soul. The truck's engine roared to life, diesel smoke joining the acrid cloud that rose from his burning home. As they drove away, Metzger called back over his shoulder with casual cruelty. "If anyone's watching from the trees," he shouted, "your woman will make a fine addition to our collection. We'll take very good care of her." His laughter echoed off the mountain walls long after the truck had disappeared down the winding road toward the village. Tomasz remained frozen until the sound of engines faded entirely, until even the smoke from his burning home had dispersed on the mountain wind. Only then did he emerge from his hiding place and walk through the wreckage of his life. They had taken everything, not just Zofia, but the photographs that documented their years together, the small treasures that marked their anniversaries, even the wooden cross her grandfather had carved for their wedding. What they couldn't steal, they had destroyed with the methodical thoroughness of men who understood that the deepest wounds were inflicted not on the body, but on the soul. In the center of their bedroom, where he and Zofia had shared 7 years of perfect intimacy, someone had left a calling card, an SS insignia torn from a uniform, dropped carelessly on their bed like a signature on a death warrant. Tomasz picked up the insignia with hands that had begun to tremble, not with fear, but with the barely contained violence of a man discovering the true depths of his own capacity for hatred. The metal was still warm from the body that had worn it, and in that warmth he felt the echo of violation, the casual arrogance of men who believed their uniforms made them untouchable. He had been wrong to think love could build walls strong enough to keep out the world's darkness. But he had been equally wrong to believe that darkness could extinguish the fire that burned at the core of his being. The shepherd was dead, burned away in the ashes of his home and the echoes of his wife's defiant curses. What emerged from those ashes was something harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. A creature of mountains and shadow that remembered older laws than those written by empires. Tomasz walked to the forest edge and knelt beside a particular pine tree, its bark scarred by the claw marks of bears in the passage of seasons. Beneath its roots lay a cache he had hoped never to disturb, weapons wrapped in oiled cloth, tools of a trade he had abandoned when he chose love over vengeance. The rifle came first, a precision instrument he had carried through battles whose names were already fading from history. Then the knife, not the simple hunting blade he carried daily, but something far more specialized, designed for the kind of work that left no room for mercy or hesitation. As he unwrapped each weapon, Tomasz felt the years of peace sloughing away like old skin. The gentle husband who had kissed Zofia goodbye at dawn was disappearing, replaced by something older and infinitely more savage. a hunter of men who had learned his trade in mountains, where only the most ruthless survived. He would find Metzger and his men. He would make them understand that some violations carried prices too terrible to imagine. And when it was over, when justice had been carved into their flesh with the precision of mountain justice, he would bring Zofia home. Or he would die in the attempt, and his ghost would haunt these peaks until the end of time. The hunt was about to begin. Father Jakob found Zofia 3 days later, crawling along the village road in the gray hour before dawn. Her torn dress was stained with blood and worse things, her feet bare and bleeding from stones, her eyes holding the hollow stare of someone who had seen too far into the abyss of human cruelty. The old priest gathered her in his arms like a broken bird, carrying her into the sanctuary of his small stone church where candles burned eternal vigil against the darkness. He had tended too many victims of war to be shocked by the physical evidence of brutality. But the sight of this strong mountain woman, reduced to trembling ruin, filled him with a rage that challenged everything he believed about mercy and forgiveness. "Who did this, child?" he whispered as he bathed her wounds with gentle hands. But Zofia could not speak. The monsters had stolen more than her body. They had taken her voice, leaving her trapped in a silence that screamed louder than any words. She lay in the priest's simple bed, staring at the ceiling with eyes that saw nothing but the echoes of violation. Father Jakob had just finished tending her wounds when the church door opened with a whisper of cold wind. He turned to find Tomasz standing in the doorway like an avatar of winter itself, pale, silent, and carrying death in his eyes. The transformation was complete now. Gone was any trace of the gentle shepherd who had brought rabbits to the village poor and helped repair storm damage without being asked. In his place stood something that belonged to the ancient stories, a spirit of vengeance given human form, patient as stone and twice as unforgiving. "Where is she?" His voice carried no emotion, but Father Jakob heard the abyss yawning beneath those simple words. "Alive," the priest replied, stepping between Tomasz and the door to his private chambers. "Hurt, but alive. She needs rest, healing, time to—" "Where are they?" Father Jakob recognized the futility of argument. He had seen this look before, in the eyes of men who had passed beyond the reach of reason or mercy. "The inn. They've been there since it happened. Drinking, celebrating, making no effort to hide what they've done." Tomasz nodded once, then turned toward the door. "Wait." The priest's voice stopped him at the threshold. "I know what you're thinking. I know what you're planning. But vengeance belongs to God, not to man." For the first time, something that might have been humor flickered in Tomasz's pale eyes. "Then your God moves too slowly, Father. Some debts can't wait for Judgment Day." "And what of her? What of Zofia? She needs you here, needs you to help her heal, not to throw your life away on revenge." Tomasz was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving to the door behind which his wife lay broken. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "She needs to know that the men who hurt her are dead. She needs to know that I made them pay for every bruise, every tear, every moment of terror they caused her. Only then can she begin to heal. And if you die in the attempt, then I'll die as her husband should, fighting the devils who stole her peace." Father Jakob watched him disappear into the pre-dawn darkness, and despite decades of preaching about mercy and forgiveness, found himself whispering a prayer that Tomasz would succeed in his terrible purpose. The inn sat at the village's edge like a canker on the landscape, its windows glowing with the yellow light of men who had no reason to fear the darkness. Inside, Metzger and his surviving men celebrated their conquest with stolen wine and stories that grew more obscene with each telling. They had reason to be confident. The local population was cowed, the nearest Wehrmacht garrison was 50 kilometers away, and they wore the insignia of a unit whose reputation preceded them, like the stench of carrion. In their minds, they were untouchable, apex predators in a world that had forgotten how to fight back. Tomasz studied them from the forest edge, counting their weapons, noting their positions, reading the tactical situation with the expertise of a man trained in the oldest form of warfare. 6 men, all armed, all drunk enough to be careless but not yet incapacitated. The inn itself was a simple structure. Stone walls, wooden roof, 2 exits and windows that could serve as additional escape routes. But Tomasz wasn't planning an assault. He was planning a hunt. The first to die was the sentry posted outside, a young soldier who had the misfortune to step away from the inn's light to relieve himself against a tree. Tomasz took him silently, the hunting knife sliding between ribs with the precision of long practice. The body was dragged into the forest and positioned where it would be found, marked with a symbol carved into the bark of a nearby pine, an ancient sign that every mountain dweller would recognize as the mark of justice. Inside the inn, the celebration continued, unaware that death had already claimed its first installment. The second man died an hour later, when he stepped outside to investigate why his comrade hadn't returned. A snare designed for wolves proved equally effective on two-legged prey, the wire loop closing around his throat with mechanical efficiency. His struggles were brief, muffled by the mountain wind, unheard by his companions. By dawn, Metzger had realized that something was terribly wrong. Two of his men had vanished without trace, leaving behind only empty posts and the growing certainty that they were being hunted. "Rouse the others," he commanded his remaining soldiers. "Full gear. We're leaving this place." But Tomasz had anticipated retreat. The road down the mountain was blocked by a carefully arranged rock slide, boulders positioned to look like natural occurrence, but placed with engineering precision to create an impassable barrier. The only way out led deeper into the mountains, into terrain where Tomasz held every advantage. The hunt continued through the morning as the SS men fled upward, following trails that seemed to offer escape, but led only deeper into the labyrinth of stone and snow that Tomasz knew like his own heartbeat. Panic began to set in as they realized they were being herded, driven like sheep toward an inevitable slaughter. The third man died in a rockfall that wasn't quite natural. Boulders that had been carefully prepared to avalanche at precisely the right moment. His screams echoed off the mountain walls before being cut short by tons of crushing stone. The fourth fell into a pit trap so perfectly concealed that even his companions didn't realize what had happened until they heard his agonized cries from 20 feet below, where sharpened stakes waited with the patience of mountain justice. By noon, only Metzger and one terrified subordinate remained, climbing desperately toward what they hoped might be safety, but was actually the killing ground Tomasz had chosen with predatory care. The abandoned hunting lodge sat like a crown on the mountain's peak, its stone walls offering the illusion of sanctuary. Metzger and his last man barricaded themselves inside, their weapons trained on the approaches, waiting for an attack that would come from a direction they couldn't anticipate. "Where is he?" the young soldier whispered, his rifle shaking in his hands as he peered through a window at the empty slopes below. "Close," Metzger replied, his scarred face tight with the first fear he had experienced in years. "He's out there somewhere, watching us." He was right. Tomasz crouched in the rocks above the lodge, invisible as shadow, studying his prey with the patience of a mountain cat. The blizzard was coming. He could smell it in the wind, feel it in the drop of temperature that made his breath steam. Soon the visibility would drop to nothing, and then the real hunt would begin. When the snow started falling, it came with the fury of mountain winter. Thick, blinding curtains that reduced the world to a few feet of swirling white chaos. Inside the lodge, Metzger and his man huddled around a meager fire, their confidence eroding with each passing minute. The attack, when it came, was not the frontal assault they expected, but something far more terrifying. The systematic dismantling of their sanctuary by a ghost who moved through the blizzard like he was born to it. The last soldier died first, taken silently when he stepped outside to gather firewood. His body was found hours later, positioned in the snow like a scarecrow, a final message that the hunter had claimed all but one of his prey. Metzger waited alone in the lodge, his weapon ready, his nerves stretched to breaking. When the door finally opened, admitting a figure cloaked in snow and shadow, he almost pulled the trigger from pure terror. "Don't," Tomasz said quietly, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight like chips of winter ice. "You'll want to save your bullets for yourself." The SS officer's hand trembled on his pistol grip as he stared at the apparition before him. No longer fully human, but something carved from the mountain's own stone and snow. "You're the husband," Metzger whispered, "the one who hid in the trees." "I'm the reckoning," Tomasz replied, stepping into the firelight with movements that spoke of absolute confidence. "I'm the price you pay for touching what was mine. She was just a woman, just another—" The words died in Metzger's throat as Tomasz moved, covering the distance between them with fluid grace. The pistol was torn from his grasp and thrown into the fire, where it discharged harmlessly into the stone chimney. "Say her name," Tomasz commanded, his hunting knife appearing in his hand like an extension of his will. "I don't—" Zofia, say it. Zofia, Metzger gasped, finally understanding that no uniform, no rank, no authority could protect him from the elemental force of a husband's love turned to vengeance. Good. Now you know who you wronged. Now you understand why you're going to die. What followed was not quick. Justice, Tomasz had learned, required time to be properly served. By the time it was finished, the blizzard had passed, leaving the world clean and white and pure. Tomasz left the lodge as the sun broke through the clouds, painting the snow gold and crimson. Behind him, the hunting lodge held only silence and the satisfaction of debts finally paid. The hunt was over. It was time to go home. The church bells were ringing vespers when Tomasz appeared in the village, walking down the mountain road like a man returning from a long journey. The snow on his clothes had melted, leaving no trace of where he had been or what he had done. To the villagers who saw him pass, he looked like any other mountain man coming down for supplies, quiet, unremarkable, carrying nothing more threatening than a walking stick. But Father Jakob knew better. The priest had been watching the mountains for 3 days, seeing the smoke that had risen from the abandoned hunting lodge, hearing the echoes of gunfire that had carried on the wind before being swallowed by the blizzard. When Tomasz entered the church, the old man was waiting for him. "Is it finished?" Father Jakob asked, though the answer was written in the profound stillness that surrounded the mountain man like an aura. "It's finished," Tomasz confirmed. "They won't hurt anyone again." The priest nodded slowly, wrestling with theological principles that seemed inadequate to address the realities of a world where monsters wore uniforms and evil demanded payment in its own currency. "And your soul?" he asked quietly. "What price did you pay for this justice?" Tomasz was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes distant with memories he would carry until death. "Whatever it cost, it was worth it. She's safe now. That's all that matters." Behind the simple wooden door that led to Father Jakob's private chambers, Zofia lay in the narrow bed where she had spent 3 days suspended between healing and despair. Her physical wounds were mending, but the deeper injuries remained. The fear that lived behind her eyes, the way she flinched at unexpected sounds, the silence that had stolen her voice. Tomasz entered like a man approaching an altar, his movements careful and reverent. He knelt beside the bed and took her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her skin, the steady pulse that confirmed what his heart needed to know. She was alive. She was here. She was his to protect again. "Zofia," he whispered, his voice carrying all the tenderness that violence had not been able to destroy. "I'm here. I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you. I'm sorry I failed you." For a moment, nothing changed. She lay still as stone, her dark eyes staring at the ceiling, lost in whatever private hell the monsters had created for her. Then slowly her fingers tightened around his. It was the smallest gesture, barely perceptible to anyone watching, but to Tomasz it was everything. It was forgiveness and recognition and the first tentative step back toward the light. It was proof that love could survive even the worst that human beings could do to each other. "They're gone," he told her, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "All of them. They can't hurt you anymore. They can't hurt anyone anymore." Zofia's eyes moved then, turning from the ceiling to meet his gaze. What he saw there made his breath catch in his throat. Not the hollow stare of a broken victim, but the fierce spirit he had fallen in love with. Wounded but not conquered. Bent but not broken. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, rusty from disuse but carrying the strength that had always been her defining characteristic. "Did they suffer?" The question hung between them like a bridge over an abyss. Tomasz understood that his answer would determine not just how she remembered this moment, but how she would be able to move forward from it. "Yes," he said simply. "They understood what they had done, and they paid for every moment of it." She nodded once, satisfied. Then for the first time since her ordeal began, Zofia smiled. Not the radiant expression of joy he remembered, but something quieter, harder, marked by knowledge of how dark the world could be, but strengthened by the certainty that someone would fight that darkness for her sake. "Take me home," she said. Father Jakob helped them prepare for the journey, providing food and warm clothes and the kind of practical blessing that acknowledged both the power of prayer and the necessity of human action. As they prepared to leave, the old priest drew Tomasz aside. "The authorities will come asking questions," he warned. "When those men don't report back, when the investigation begins, Let them come, Tomasz replied with the calm of a man who had nothing left to fear. They'll find what they need to find, and they won't find what they don't need to know. And if they connect you to what happened? Tomasz looked back at Zofia, who was waiting by the church door with something of her old dignity restored, her dark hair catching the afternoon light. Then they'll learn that some things are worth dying for. The journey up the mountain took most of the day, following paths that Tomasz knew by heart, even in darkness. Zofia walked beside him without complaint, her hand resting lightly on his arm for support and connection. They spoke little, but the silence between them was different now, not the awful emptiness of trauma, but the comfortable quiet of two people who understood each other as completely. Their cabin was gone, reduced to ash and memory by the monsters who had stolen their peace. But the foundation remained, and the view was unchanged. Mountains stretching to the horizon, snow-capped peaks touched with alpenglow, the eternal landscape that had shaped them both. We'll rebuild, Tomasz said, surveying the blackened ruins of their former life. Yes, Zofia agreed, her voice growing stronger with each word. We'll make it better than before. Stronger. They broke our house, but they couldn't break what we built together. As the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they stood together in the ruins of their old life and began planning their new one. The shepherd and his wife, scarred but not defeated, ready to build again on the foundation of love that had proved stronger than hatred. In the distance, wolves howled their ancient songs to the mountain moon. But these were the honest wolves of the wilderness, not the monsters that walked on two legs and wore uniforms. Those wolves were dead, their threat ended by a husband's love and a mountain's justice. The hunt was over. The healing could begin.